When Jackie Robinson was hired by the Dodgers and Branch Rickey, he was actually signed a contract in late 1945, and they needed a place for him to play in 1946. He played in the Negro League, so he was playing the top Negro League ball of the day, but they wanted a place to put him where he'd be accepted and where he would be liked, and it just happened that Montreal was Brooklyn's AAA team at the time. They were called the Montreal Royals, and so Branch sent Jackie up to Montreal. Got a standing ovation. The crowd loved him. They won the AAA World Series that year, so they won the championship that year. And then, of course, he broke the modern day color barrier in 1947 with the Dodgers and went on to his Hall of Fame career.
Hello, and welcome to episode 69 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Becker. We have a nice show for you today. You just heard from Scott Crawford of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. He will be my guest today as we cover topics from Joey Votto, Jackie Robinson, and Le Grand Orange to the Montreal Expos and the World Baseball Classic. If you want to say and who makes it into the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame, head to irishbaseball.org and become a member of the Irish American Baseball Society. In 2023, Jim Leland, Jim Palmer, and John McSherry were inducted. The conversations have already started for 2024, so make sure you are a member. Now let's welcome Scott Crawford to the show. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to talk some baseball.
So you are representing the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, and I want to start off very simply with the basics. If somebody wants to visit the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, where are they going to head, and how can they go visit you?
Yeah, well, two very good questions. I mean, we're located in St. Mary's, Ontario, which if you know where Toronto is, we're about 2 hours west of Toronto. So relatively really easy to find, just off the main highway. We've been in St. Mary's since we opened here in 1998 after being in Toronto for a few years. And so we've been open 25 years now. So pretty easy to find, and we're a great museum with walking trails and ball fields and lots to do.
So why don't we talk about that first? You obviously do have a very substantial facility at the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. So I'm assuming, unlike the National Baseball Hall of Fame here in the States, you're not just a museum. It feels like you are actively participating in the game of baseball there.
Well, for sure. And that's one of the reasons St. Mary's won the bid to bring the Hall of Fame here. We have 32 acres of land, which if you can picture that, and we have 4 ball fields on our site with walking trails and space around them, a lot of nature and trees and whatnot. It allows us, we host about 1,000 events here in the summertime, from ball games and practices and tournaments and clinics and camps and everything here on our site. And right from kids that are, just learn the game at 5-6 years old, right up to the elite amateur baseball in the province, which goes to 18-year-olds. Plus we have slow pitch here, and so a wide range of activity and events, and that just goes, and it's all like basically attached to the museum. The museum's on site too, and so a lot of teams come here and play ball games and have a barbecue, and then come in the museum to learn some great baseball history.
So at the Irish American Baseball Society, one of our goals, long-term goals maybe, is to get Ireland represented in the World Baseball Classic. And you're saying that you have a lot of youth baseball. You definitely are working to promote the game in Canada. Have you noticed that Canada being a part of the World Baseball Classic, as that has grown over the past few years, have you noticed the World Baseball Classic really being something that is exciting the younger generation, making them more interested in baseball, maybe one day representing their country in a tournament like that? Canada's been a part of the WBC since its inception. So have you noticed that really helping to promote the game there?
It's one of my favorite tournaments, the World Baseball Classic, because it's country versus country, right? Obviously up here in Canada, you got all the hockey stuff going on, and when Canada's playing the States or the gold medal game in hockey, it's so exciting. And baseball's the same way. The World Baseball Classic is the best of each country. You look at Team USA this year, they were stacked. Japan obviously won the tournament, and not as well known names, but they're obviously amazing at baseball and have been for years. Team Dominican Republic was was favored to win the whole darn tournament, and they didn't get out of the first round. That's why you got to play the game. Your team can be really good on paper, but you got to play the game, right? It's like any sport. Anybody can win any time, and that's what's exciting with these tournaments. And yeah, I mean, the better baseball Canada can do in that tournament, any tournament helps create excitement for kids. I mean, we went 2-2 this year. We didn't get out of the first round again, but the 2 wins were good to see. And they're only going to build on it. We have a lot of young talents in the minor leagues right now, and that is coming up through the system. And baseball in Canada has a lot to do with how Baseball Canada does the tournaments, but also on how the Blue Jays do. Because the Blue Jays are winning like they are the last couple of years. Kids get excited. Kids wear their blue T-shirt to school or their Blue Jays hat to school, and it's cool to like baseball, and so that's a good thing for us.
One more quick question about baseball in Canada in general, and then we are going to move on to talking about the Hall of Fame specifically. But there's a lot of talk about expansion and teams moving, which has a lot of people reevaluating the Montreal Expos and the possibility that baseball might return to Montreal at some point. And even if it doesn't, or if it does, just talking about when baseball was in Montreal for all those years, what type of legacy do you think the Expos have, not just on baseball in general, but Canadian baseball specifically?
Well, I mean, the Expos were the first team, right? I mean, they started in 1969. The Jays didn't start till 1977. So the Expos were Canada's first Major League Baseball team, and some people forget that. And the Expos have been gone almost 20 years now. It's hard to believe they left after 2004. And the Expos mean a lot to baseball in Canada. We help preserve them. They're still so popular, and people come in the door. We have displays about them. We talk about them, and people want to do the same. I mean, we had a ton of Blue Jay fans here, but as soon as you start talking about Canadian baseball, the Expos always come out in people's conversations. And it's probably a lot to do with like the great players they had. Not only the greatest Canadian hitter ever, Larry Walker, but you go back to the 80s and Andre Dawson and Gary Carter and Tim Raines and Steve Rogers and manager Jim Fanning and Tim Wallach at third base. Like, you go on and on and on. And more recently with Vladimir Guerrero and and Moises Alou, and Expos were unlimited in the talent they brought through the game, brought up from their minor leagues. And unfortunately, they weren't able to keep it, as we all know, and they went off to other teams. But just the teams Expos built, if they could have stayed together, the Expos would have been the first Canadian team to win a World Series, not the Blue Jays.
And even looking at that 94 strike and how good the Expos were that season, and I think they were the favorites to win the World Series that year, the 94 strike really, really hurt that franchise.
It did, and it was unfortunate. The fortunate thing is they did play for another 10 years after that. But as you can see, after 94, I mean, Larry Walker left, and then Mike Lansing left, and some of the pitchers left. And it was just one of those things where it's just hard to keep the talent because they didn't have the money and the support.
All right, the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. What are some of the exhibits that you have on display? What are some of the things that people can see, not just the players who are inducted, but some of the things people can see to get some of the history of Canadian baseball?
Yeah, I mean, we're still a relatively small museum, but we're about 3,500 square feet. And, you can walk in the first room, it has sort of a display on Larry Walker and Joey Votto, because they're arguably the two greatest hitters to ever play. And then we have a current display on either our new collections or on Canadians who are playing in the major leagues right now. So that sort of grabs the kids or the people who are really only liking today's game as opposed to the game 50 years ago. But you walk back in the museum, we sort of divide the other part of the museum into 5 sections. One is sort of a history cultural room where we talk about baseball it goes back to 1793 in New Brunswick up here in Canada. We talk about Jackie Robinson, of course, with the Major League Baseball does a Jackie Robinson Day every year. And just certain aspects of the game. I mean, we talk about the coaches and the umpires and the scouts and the scorekeepers and the trainers. And, because as we all love seeing the players play, but without scorekeepers and announcers and trainers and coaches, the game doesn't happen. And then we talk about the players room. We have, from Canadian players, the famous Blue Jay Expo players to, famous people who played in Canada. We have an autographed Babe Ruth bat and baseball on display. because Babe Ruth played some time in Toronto. He didn't play for Toronto, but he played some minor league ball in Toronto during his days. And then, like we talked earlier, we have about the Expos. Of course, the Blue Jays and Expos are a huge part of the museum, and then we have the Hall of Fame plaque gallery as well, which talks about the best of the Hall of Famers in the museum.
And I just want to circle back to Jackie Robinson, as you mentioned. I think a lot of our listeners who are my age and older have no question why you brought up Jackie Robinson. Maybe some of our younger listeners don't know about Jackie Robinson's connection to baseball in Canada, and it's huge. It's a big part of that story.
It is. I mean, when Jackie Robinson was hired by the Dodgers and Branch Rickey, he was actually signed a contract in late 1945, and they needed a place for him to play in 1946. He played in the Negro League, so he was playing the top Negro League ball of the day, but they wanted a place to put him where he'd be accepted and where he would be liked, and it just happened that Montreal was Brooklyn's AAA team at the time. They were called the Montreal Royals, and so Branch sent Jackie up to Montreal. Got a standing ovation. The crowd loved him. They won the AAA World Series that year, so they won the championship that year. And then, of course, he broke the modern day color barrier in 1947 with the Dodgers, and went on to his Hall of Fame career. Did lots of things after his playing career. And of course, the Jackie Robinson Museum just opened up in New York in the summer of 2022. So if you're ever there, you got to head up and see that museum.
So now we're going to get into the actual Hall of Fame and the players that get selected to represent the best of the best in Canadian baseball. So first of all, who qualifies? Are these players who were born in Canada? Are these players who played in Canada?
It's a bit of a mix. I mean, 71% of our inductees are Canadian born. So basically 3/4 are born in Canada. The other 29% are sort of all-time great Blue Jay Expos. For example, like Dave Steeves in our Hall of Fame, Joe Carter's in our Hall of Fame, Tony Fernandez. And of course, some of the Expos you mentioned earlier, Tim Raines, Andre Dawson, Gary Carter, Tim Wallach, those types, Steve Rogers, those people are in our Hall of Fame too, because they've done something significant in the game of baseball in Canada, which is key if you're not Canadian. You can't play one season with the Blue Jays or Expos and think you're getting in our Hall of Fame. Several of these guys that there's who you went to see. If you're an Expo fan, you went to see Gary Carter and Tim Raines. If you're a Blue Jay fan in the 80s, you went to see Tony Fernandez at shortstop, or in the 90s, Carlos Delgado at first base, because that was who you wanted to see, the best of the best. And so, yeah, I mean, they're mostly are Canadian born, but of course, Canadian baseball represents all aspects of Canadian baseball.
There is at least one player, and I didn't look at all of the potential crossover that we've had, but one of my personal favorite players who is represented both in the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame and the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. And I think he was an underrated player in his day. And I think we're just starting to realize with some of the modern analytics just how good Rusty Staub was when he played in the major leagues. He is represented in both of our Hall of Fames. So if you could talk about Rusty Staub, the impact, I mean, Le Grand Orange, the best nickname in baseball history, how he sort of ingratiated himself into the culture in Montreal, how he made himself a Canadian baseball representative in his time with the Expos.
For sure. I mean, Rusty Staub, like you said, he's a legend. He played 2,951 games, which I think is the most games by any player not in the Hall of Fame other than Pete Rose. So he played for 23 years, believe it or not. Starting 19, went to 41, right? So, and he played 4 years with Montreal. He's in our Hall of Fame. You're right. He was a couple-time All-Star of the Expos. Played just over 500 games, but the key thing about him is he came to the Expos in their very first season in 1969, and the community fell in love with him. He participated. He learned French. He went out and did events. He really got into the community a lot more than other players. So he became a fan favorite. Like you said, he got his cool nickname because of his orangey red hair he had. And he turned out to be one of the best players. And you're right. If you look at his numbers, I mean, he had more walks than strikeouts. He had a career on base of 362. I mean, if he played in today's game, he'd be one of the best paid players in all of baseball. And because he could get on base, he could hit for average, he had some power. He was an all-star. He just played well. I mean, he was mostly end of his career definitely first base / DH pinch hitter, but to play 23 years in the big leagues, you definitely know what you're doing, and you're one of the best all time.
And he sort of reminds me of another Canadian player who is still active, and that's Joey Votto, who is another guy who just does all the right things. And sometimes maybe it's a little quiet because he's there in Cincinnati, but he's a personality as well, sort of a lot like Rusty Staub, where he ingratiated himself into that community. He is a part of Cincinnati baseball history right now, that legacy, and you can't take that away from him. And I have a feeling someday he's going to find his way into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
For sure. You got to be retired 3 years. So Joey's got a few years left. Hopefully he plays for a few more years after this. Joey, I mean, he was signed as an 18-year-old catcher out of Ontario here by the Cincinnati Reds. So he's been with the Reds more than he lived in Ontario for his life. And he's going to go to the Cooperstown. He's going to the National Baseball Hall of Fame when he's done. With his numbers, he's a 300 hitter. His on base is over 400. His slugging is over 500. He's won like 7 on base titles. He's won MVP award. He's won Gold Gloves. He's won Silver Sluggers. He's won everything he could almost win as an individual player. And I know he'd love the Reds to be in the playoffs more, but that's a team game. You can't always help that aspect. But Joey is amazing. He is a quiet fella. He has routine. He doesn't like to mess with his routine, but he's played 15, 16 years in the big leagues, and he's going to the Hall of Fame, so his routine's working for him.
Absolutely. I am surprised when I see people who aren't 100% sure that he's going to be a Hall of Famer. In my mind, he is the definition of Hall of Famer. He just does everything the right way. He's been so good for the game. He's a character, which the game has had so many of them. But then you just look at the numbers, and he's undeniable in that respect as well. So I think he brings absolutely everything that you could want in a ball player. And the people in Cincinnati absolutely love him. I'm sure the people back in Canada are just crazy about him.
He is. I mean, Joey's going to be up. Larry Walker is the best all-around player in baseball because Larry could steal bases and won multiple Gold Gloves. We talk about Joey Votto. I mean, his hitting numbers are right there with Larry's. He played a couple more years. He's going to pass Larry in career hits this summer. 2 or 3 more years, he might pass Larry in career home runs. So when you're talking top 5 players of all time, obviously Fergie and Larry, because they're in Cooperstown already, are number 1, 2. But Joey would be in the rest of that top 5 for sure.
And what about Freddie Freeman playing for Canada this year in the World Baseball Classic? Was that a big deal? Because he is one of the best doing it right now. And for him to decide to play for Team Canada had to be a big deal.
It is. I mean, he's one of the best players in all of baseball. He won the MVP a year ago, and he's been great with the Braves and now great with the Dodgers. And both his parents were born in Ontario, so that makes him eligible to play for Canada in the World Baseball Classic, which he did in 2017 and again this past spring. It's great. His mom passed away when he was young, so he likes to represent Canada to remember his mom by. And when you can have one of the best players in your clubhouse, like I think every young Canadian in that clubhouse, because we did have one of the youngest teams in that tournament, they should be crowding around Freddie Freeman and sucking the power and energy out of Freddie's great talents that he has, and just taking every ounce of knowledge they can get from Freddie. Because again, Freddie's played 12 years, he's been MVP, he's been All-Star, he's won all the awards, and if you can't learn something from Freddie Freeman, then you shouldn't be in the clubhouse.
And before I let you go, I just want to ask sort of a big picture question, and that is the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. What would you say is your mission? Is it preserving history? Is it trying to grow the game forward? Is it some combination of the two?
It's definitely a combination. I mean, when the Hall of Fame, it started in Toronto in the early 80s, right? And they had the museum, and one of the reasons we won the Hall of Fame in St. Mary's here is because we had the facility where we could build ball fields yet and preserve the museum. So I always like to tell visitors and guests that we preserve the vast history of baseball in Canada inside the museum, but we're promoting the future. I mean, one of our big windows inside the museum looks directly at a ball field. And so we're giving tours and talking baseball history. At the same time, right at the window, there's the 10-year-old kid playing ball. And, you and I love baseball and whatnot. We're adults. We need that 10-year-old kid to fall in love with the game and to stay in love with the game. And and just keep pulling that game forward, because the more people that love baseball, you start at a young age, you'll catch them, you'll get them for life. And that's really important.
Scott Crawford of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was just very enlightening, and I really appreciate it.
No problem. It's always great to talk baseball. So anytime you want to chat, just you know how to find me, and we'll talk some more baseball.
I'm Rick Becker. The Irish Baseball Podcast is a production of the Irish American Baseball Society. Check us out at irishbaseball.org. This has been episode 69 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.